Still have a cold. I have a cold. I've had a cold for 4,000 years. Loserchildhotpants here, also known as Melly the Hun, and sometimes people call me by my actual name, Melanie. Not often on the internet, but it's been known to happen. Recently I got some questions about some of my fics, and I thought that it would be a cool idea to answer them in a video where I could talk kind of freely about it. Anonymous asked me how much research was involved with making my fic Seeing Wolves Where There Are No Wolves. Said the therapist was very realistic. Thank you very much. There wasn't a lot of research involved. I went to school and I got an associate's with a concentration in social work. So a lot of what Dr. Lundy in that fic goes over is stuff that I was taught during crisis intervention classes and group therapy classes and things like that. But in my free time, I also really like learning about abnormal psychology. I've also been in therapy for many years. I've got a whole laundry list of things wrong with me, including anxiety disorders, which is what Dr. Lundy covers a lot of in that fic. So there wasn't really a lot of research. It was based a lot on personal experience. And you know, I've read a couple fics where there's been a therapist and it's been pretty bad. Pretty bad examples of what therapy would be like. And I think that people don't really like sharing, you know, personal experiences with their therapist, so they probably don't write about it a lot. But I don't really mind. I don't really mind sharing. Seeing Wolves Where There Are No Wolves was based off of a lot of sessions that I had, things that I wish I had heard, and things I did hear. So not much research, but thank you. I'm glad you thought that the therapist was realistic. Ozgirl6 asked me, I love Just to See You Again. Was there something that inspired you to write it? Thank you. I'm really glad that you liked it. The inspiration for that fic came from hearing a lecture by a woman who is a professional love letter writer, which is something I've never considered before. And her lecture was really wonderful and so romantic. And I couldn't possibly recreate the poetry that she spun. But after hearing her lecture, I was like, oh, that would make a really cute alternate universe fic. And then being the angst lover that I am, I thought, oh, what if I make it unbearably painful also? So I did. The entire fic was written around Derek's final letter. That was the first thing I knew I wanted to write, and motivated me through that entire story. I can't remember where I heard the phrase believing in a life after death is good just to see you again. It doesn't really feel like something that came from my brain. Like, I feel like I read that somewhere, but I'm also a heavy reader, so sometimes I really can't pinpoint where I read something, but that phrase came to mind and I thought, oh, that would be great. I want to put that in the letter. I want that phrase to mean something. Frankly, I'm pretty shocked that it got to this level of popularity. At the time that I wrote it, I was kind of in a writing slump and I wasn't filling prompts very quickly. I wasn't really feeling it. And then I just got inspired by this alternate universe. And I started writing it, and I was thinking about, like, the whole time that I was writing it, I was thinking to myself, no one's gonna read this, it's gonna, you know, because the tags, like, I have to include that there's gonna be major character death, and I don't touch those. And I thought, oh, well, that's gonna be kind of sad, that it'll go to waste, whatever, it won't be read by a lot of people, but whatever, it was the first thing that I felt inspired and motivated to write for a couple weeks, so I put my time into that, and, then it just kind of blew up. I mean, it's easily surpassed the popularity of Seeing Wolves Where There Are No Wolves and Derek Hale's Possible Heart, which are my two other most popular fics. A lot of the people who have read it and left reviews on my AO3 have said things like that they trust me. They trusted me enough to read it despite the warnings, which is wild, and I'm so glad that people were taking a chance on it and reading it despite the warnings. So yeah, most of my fics on AO3 have under 1,000 kudos. It's not like I'm a very popular writer on AO3 or anything, but wow. Yeah, Just to See You Again got very popular, and while it was inspired by that lecture, it grew legs and ran away from me and became this huge thing that I had no idea it was going to become. Yet another obsessive reader asked about Just to See You Again. What was your inspiration for Styles' dream of finding an old drawer full of love letters? In like the alternate universes that I do write, I like to try to create parallels between the alternate universe and the canon universe. And for me, it was the best parallel I could come up with for Styles, because canon Styles is, you know, he likes the extreme, you know, he gets excited when his dad, you know, gets calls about a murder having happened. He wants to go find the dead body in the woods. He's kind of always looking for the ultimate of whatever he's into. And for this alternate universe, I figure if he's so inspired by letter writing, it would be what he would want to find. When he does talk about the dream, about wanting to find this drawer full of old letters, it has more to do with knowing that people can fall in love like that. I mean, his entire character is a little bit cynical about actually writing the love letters. Like, he believes in romantic love, but when he talks about it with Derek, he says he kind of thought of it as a formula for most of his life. Like, he thought it was just something you need ingredients for. If you can mix it up right, if you can make it just right, it'll happen, instead of something more natural. Styles finding the, wanting to find the treasure trove of letters has more to do with him wanting to believe that there's not a formula to it. The kind of life he wants to lead. When he's exchanging letters with Derek, he sort of talks about giving up on a lot of his aspirations. He wants to be a fiction writer, but he's probably going to go into journalism because it's unrealistic. And even though Derek is more of the jaded character when it comes to talking about love, he says not to give up on those dreams. In any case, Styles, in true canon Styles fashion, he looks for those letters in a not always legal way, and I think that that was sort of, in an unspoken way in the writing, it was his longing for genuine love, to find something that couldn't be formulated and couldn't have ingredients, couldn't, you know, be found with coordinates. It had to be something sincere, and I think that that's what drove him for that dream. But you know, originally it was just supposed to be a parallel for Styles' intensity about everything else in the canon universe. Bumpkin Is asked, where in the world did Derek get that information about vulvas? Why did he steal the mailman's truck, and was Styles' dad involved in clearing it all up? And finally, what is the story about Monopoly? For those of you that don't know, this is a reference to Derek Hale's Possible Heart. That's a lot. Okay. In my mind, Derek obtains this information from Peter. And that's why I have Peter laughing so loudly in that scene. Peter's entire character, even when he was mostly harmless, was sort of a bully to Derek, and I feel like he would easily give Derek information in the hopes that Derek would embarrass himself with it. I think Peter just kind of gave him age-inappropriate information and was kind of waiting for a situation where Derek was going to raise his hand and say something embarrassing. But instead it came out in this sort of safe space in his own home in a private, you know, conversation between families, so that they were kind of shocked by his knowledge, but he didn't necessarily embarrass himself. Styles' father was not involved in clearing up Derek's mail truck incident, but I can promise you that there was no forethought about the mail truck. There's no reason that he was going to steal the mail truck. There was nothing in the mail truck for him. He just did it because he was a teenage boy and they do stupid things. As for the Monopoly story, I kind of feel bad spoiling it, you know, because it's supposed to be something only Laura can tell us, but based on all of the other stories of my version of young Derek, he's painted as a sort of justice-oriented kid. And Monopoly, being a satirical game that's meant to criticize the evils of capitalism, it wouldn't jive with young Derek and his sense of goodness. The story I think Laura would tell you is that Derek was losing to Peter, like everyone else, because who else would be winning at Monopoly? It would be Peter. That he had some type of revelation that there's no real fairness to the game, and that winning really depends on coercing other players to trade and rent-seeking, and she would probably tell you that Peter started teasing Derek, and the entire game ended with Derek table flipping the game onto the floor and storming into his room. In her stories about him, she refers to him as a communist. She uses it as an insult, a misplaced insult because he prefers Pepsi over Coke, but that may have something to do with the Monopoly story. Mad Madame M asked, Mad Madame M, who is friggin' wonderful, and you should all be following her and reading all of her fics because she's so wonderful, asked me, what inspired the style of Derek Hale's Possible Heart? I know it went differently from what the prompt suggested, and I wonder how it came to you, and if you could expound on how you came up with some of the stuff in Laura's book. For those of you that don't know, the original prompt was sent to me by an Anon, and it was for a fic where Laura and Styles gang up on Derek to tease him, and it would somehow end up with Derek unintentionally admitting his crush on Styles. This was before I was super comfortable with writing totally alternate universes, so I still wanted to keep to some canon rules. What I love about the Laura-Derek dynamic is that she's so important to fans and she's so important to the show, and we don't know her. She's absent, and still her influence exists. Like, we see it in how Derek behaves. We're all curious as to how much she influenced him. Laura's absence, while it's painful, is really inspiring to me, you know, never really knowing what friendships could have evolved and never really knowing what her relationship with Derek was like. So I wanted to write about her absence. But, you know, a lot of what she writes is teasing. It's a lot, you know, the whole journal itself is kind of like, you know, here's how you work the Derek. So that was my way of kind of bringing her into the world again. But I also thought it'd be nice. She's obviously writing these things at a time when she's happy. Early notes in her journal, and, like, you know, the very low numbers, she talks about their parents in the present tense. And as you get further into the numbered facts, she starts talking about them in the past tense. So a lot of these are written, you can tell they're written over the course of a couple years. So I wanted to make it a sort of growth, and we could experience her at different times rather than only at one place in time. I didn't want to write something too alternate universe because I wasn't comfortable with it yet, and I thought a really wonderful way to use Laura without her being there would be if she left something for him, which I think she would. It seems like Derek's whole family left him things. As for some of the facts, I'll give you a couple. It's so much to go into because all of these headcanons come from specific scenes and specific places, and it would be way too much to go into, but I can give you a couple about the headcanons in Derek Hale's Possible Heart. My sister had a friend in high school who did steal a mailman's truck. It does only go 15 miles per hour, and it is a felony. So don't do it. It is a felony, and it is something that, while I didn't witness, I know happened, and that's where I use, it's a funny thing that I thought young Derek was totally capable of, even though it seems a little more like canon Styles today. The bit about dried fruit has to do with an old friend of mine. He's not a feelings type of person, like doesn't hug, doesn't kiss, like doesn't thank his mother for anything. He's kind of cold, very guarded, and I loved him so much. I was so verbal about loving him so much, and it made him very, very uncomfortable. After I moved from New York, I'd come to visit a lot, and one of the times that I came to visit, I went to his house, and his mother said, don't you have a gift for Melanie? And of course I got so excited because I was like, oh, you have something for me, you do love me. And he came back to me with it was like a goodie bag of dried pineapple, which I'd mentioned once. Like, I'd mentioned once that I really love dried pineapple. And he had this, it was like a pound of dried pineapple. But it was because he was so emotionally constipated that him giving that to me was so emotional for me. I almost cried. I almost cried over dried pineapple. And I think that from that point on, he's like, I'm never giving you a gift again. This was weird. But that's where that came from, is that I love dried fruit, and I consider it a very emotional gift. As for the last fact of the book, mentioned at the end of the first part of Derek Hale's Possible Heart, those were my original wedding vows. I mean, obviously, switched around with the names and everything. But I'm very bad at feelings in front of other people. I can be poetic and lovey-dovey with Nathan behind closed doors, but when we were in front of all of our friends and family, I panicked super hard and decided to scrap them and not say them out loud, though I did eventually read them to him later. But yeah, I think it's fact 1000, I think at the very end of the first part of Derek Hale's Possible Heart, those were my original wedding vows. Butterflies and Bellinis asked, where did the original metaphor of seeing wolves where there are no wolves come from? So, in the fic, the quote where that's relevant goes, when a rabbit in the woods sees a wolf, it panics. Its heart rate skyrockets, its nervous system prepares for fight or flight, and rabbits even defecate while they run to make themselves lighter in order to move faster. Everything in their body instinctively tells them to run away from the danger of a wolf, and that's completely natural. Anxiety is there to protect us. An anxiety disorder is when a person sees wolves where there are no wolves. I've been in therapy for plenty of years, and I've worked with all different kinds of psychiatrists, psychologists, counselors, therapists. My favorite type of therapy was behavioral cognitive therapy. And that has to do with changing the way you talk to yourself in your head, and how that will shape reality for you. The counselor that I saw for a very short period of time gave me a very long-winded version of that story about the rabbit seeing the wolf in the woods. The phrase that an anxiety disorder is seeing wolves where there are no wolves really stuck with me. And I remember I was driving home and I was thinking about it the whole time afterward. It's a very honest statement. I feel like anybody with an anxiety or panic disorder will know that feeling, because a lot of the time people with these disorders acknowledge that their fears are irrational. They know that they're not in any real danger, but that doesn't make the panic and the anxiety go away. That phrase it inspired the entire fic, because I'm headed home and I'm thinking, wouldn't it be wonderful if Derek just went to therapy and worked through all of his shit so he could be, a little more pleasant? I had these big dreams for Alpha Derek, and I miss Alpha Derek so much. bring us back to the magic of season 2 of Teen Wolf, but I had all these dreams for him, that he was going to be this great alpha, and he was going to be able to teach all the werewolves all these cool things that his parents taught him. And everybody in the Teen Wolf fandom knows that Fanon basically fixes everything that the writers did with Teen Wolf. This was my way of fixing the issues with Derek. Derek is kind of thrown under the bus a lot, and nobody really seems to care about him. I mentioned in the fic is that Styles seems to be the only person that really cares about his emotional well-being. Like when Boyd is killed and Styles sort of offers comfort to Derek. Part of what inspired this whole fic is, you know, maybe Styles could be a really important, significant part of Derek's healing process, which would have been so interesting to see happen. The fic is like on fast forward. Like, I think Seeing Wolves just takes course over 1 year. And with the issues that Derek has and the traumas he's experienced, therapy would have taken years. There were actually so many different scenes that I wanted to write for him in therapy, and there were so many different subjects that I wanted to touch on. That fic started off with like 30 chapters, and then I limited myself to 16. I said, I'm not going to go over 16 chapters. So yeah, that's the original metaphor for Seeing Wolves Where There Are No Wolves was something very insightful that one of my cognitive behavioral therapists said to me, and it stuck. And of course it has to do with wolves. So I'm being funny. Get it? The last question is asked by Annie N. Milton, who's also so sweet. Oh my god. She asked, in your story, Derek Hale's Possible Heart, how did you find Laura's voice? There are so many fics where the sibling bond is overshadowed by the alpha-beta one, or her ascribed personality drowns out Derek's. How did you find a balance where you could convey her emotion but still keep it relentlessly focused on Derek? Thank you, first of all. Finding Laura's voice had a lot to do with having an older sister myself. And if I'm being honest, at times, she is the alpha to my beta. She was always the better writer, she was wittier, cleaner, more well-spoken, and of course, you know, she got responsibilities and sometimes leniency or something for just being older. So she was, at times, my alpha. That being said, we also have a really profound friendship. And we both look up to each other for different reasons. And a lot of fic describes Laura as really overbearing, which I think gets confused with the idea of what an alpha is. I think that, especially, I feel like that I could go on a whole rant about it, but, you know, where, you know, male alphas are kind of described as hyper masculine and almost uncaring, and then whenever there's you know, feminine or female alphas in fic, they're always described as like really overbearing. Anyway, so in fic she's made into this like mother hen character on steroids, and there are times when my sister and I are all we have. You know, there are times when we can't go to our parents, and, you know, our family is pretty torn up. So there are times when we only have each other, and that's not really the dynamic that happens. She takes on some, like, maternal aspects, but she's not overbearing. You know, calling to check up on me and, you know, offering her help, even if I said even if I didn't say that I needed any help, just making me know that she's there if I need it. And I imagine Laura being the same way. I feel like there's more of a subtlety to her. Laura is kind of overbearing in Derek Hale's Possible Heart. She wrote a manual on him. This is like micromanaging his life. If she had been alive for this, which she had predicted, she thought she would be alive for the day that this book was handed to someone. And you can imagine that there are a bunch of footnotes like, oh, just ask me about this someday. We'll talk more about it in private. I don't want this in writing. So there are clues throughout that she thought she was going to be there for it. That in and of itself is overbearing. But it can be done in a subtle way. You know, an overbearing character doesn't have to be physically shoving another character into another character's arms. Like, it doesn't have to be so blatant. An overbearing person is usually someone who's just kind of annoying at times. This is a more subtle way of giving her the mother hen aspect and making her overbearing without making the actual characterization of her overbearing. As far as the balance goes, I mean, I really try to make that in all of my writing, that there's a balance between characters, that you know, it's not necessarily heavily leaning towards any one particular point of view. Really, it became a story told between Derek and Laura that Styles got to see. That's what created the balance, is that it wasn't it's a story about Derek not being told by the writer, but by a third party in the story. And I think that that's where it got its balance from. I tried to make a voice for Laura, who I don't think she'd be scary. I think that, you know, she would probably be as intense as Derek, but probably in a different way. I imagine that their whole family was like that. Peter is very intense. Cora also very, I mean, I feel like they tried to make her intense by giving her, like, masculine character traits. I could talk about the misogyny in Teen Wolf forever, though, so we're not going to go into that. But there are some reviews that I got by people. One in particular was a mother who said that she has a very young son, and that Derek Hale's Possible Heart inspired her to start keeping a journal of these things to eventually give to, you know, whoever her son eventually falls in love with, marries, or whatever. Which is, like, beautiful, and I can't even talk about, you know, actually inspiring people to do something on the physical plane with my writing, because then I get super emotional and I'm bad at feelings. But that's the kind of love that I wanted to write about, where it extends beyond death. And I heard a phrase once. The quote goes that if a writer falls in love with you, you never really die. The idea being that they will always be writing about you in some way or another. They'll always be recreating you. Laura loved Derek, and I think we were able to tell how much she loved Derek just by how broken Derek was by losing her. Through those small scenes we had with him in regard to Laura, we were really able to tell that he not only lost what he thought was his last surviving family member, but he lost the last person that cared about him. So I think that's also why it hurts so bad when no one else cares about him. Scott doesn't care about him. Styles, I mean, later, but, you know, season 1 and 2 Styles is, like, kind of hoping Derek gets lost. So I think that that's what made the sting worse. And I think I just wanted to get that across, the feeling that Derek was deeply cared about, and being able to capture the tragedy of her absence while still embracing how wonderful her existence was. Yeah, that's it. Those are all the questions. That's it. Hope you found this entertaining, and that it answered some questions for you. And And elephants are the only mammals that can't jump. So if you didn't like this video, you can walk away saying that at least you learned something.